Our Media Madness story, professor and Black Lives Matter activist Mark Lamont Hill has declared that one of the explicit goals of BLM is the embracing of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement for the dismantling of Israel. Take a look.
This generation of activists is saying, no, let's defund. No, let's abolish. Let's imagine new possibilities. And one of the new possibilities that they've imagined is a world where that is anti-imperialist. That they don't want to just nation build, but they want a world make. And so Black Lives Matter very explicitly is talking about the dismantling of a Zionist project, dismantling of a settler colonial project, and very explicitly embracing BDS on those grounds. So it's analytical, it's tied, our fates are tied up, but there's also a very clear political mission that I think is far more progressive or radical than we had even 20 years ago in the mainstream.
Now, it can even be argued that referring to Israelis as colonists and as settlers is a deliberate anti-Semitic smear attempting to delegitimize Israel's right to exist. The BDS movement has been criticized by the Anti-Defamation League for its role in employing anti-Semitic rhetoric and narratives that demonize Israel. Hill was formerly a CNN contributor but was fired in 2018 after footage surfaced of him calling for Palestine to be, quote, free from the river to the sea, which is a pro-Palestinian slogan that suggests a one-state solution, essentially abolishing the state of Israel. With me now is Ian Haworth, editor for the Daily Wire and host of the Ian Haworth Show. Welcome back, Ian.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
Great. So here we have Mark Lamont Hill openly admitting that one of the goals of BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, is to dismantle Israel. Why is that? What's going on here?
Well, I think it really shows how intertwined Black Lives Matter is with the radical left in general. I do find it somewhat amusing that he came out and openly said that they were embracing BDS, that it was, their fates were intertwined, when so many people are actively fighting to disassociate Black Lives Matter from BDS, from other anti-Semitic, anti-Israel groups. So I think it's pretty fascinating. He just came out and said it, and I think that shows how bold a lot of people are in these combined movements that are radically to the left, that seek to abolish the one Jewish state in the world while ignoring a lot of the behavior of other countries that do far worse than anyone could ever accuse Israel of doing.
You're exactly right. When we hear Mark Lamont Hill and others on the left saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, on its surface it sounds benign, but then when you look what they actually mean, a one-state solution, do you fear that that could also open the door to, say, possible genocide or some other horrific incident?
Well, that's exactly what that would lead to. I mean, if you scratch beneath the surface of Middle East history just in the last century, people have called for Jews to be pushed into the sea from Israel. That's exactly where a one-state solution would go. And so that's why that rhetoric is so dangerous. Let's also not forget that we have members of Congress like Rashida Tlaib who have used, if not this exact rhetoric, or very similar rhetoric in the past. So the danger of this, I don't really see coming from Black Lives Matter. The danger I see is that Black Lives Matter legitimize this kind of rhetoric. It becomes far more mainstream. And then basically a genocidal slogan is accepted as the norm.
And the crazy part to me is that here you hear the BLM, the leftists here in America, consistently, anyone who doesn't agree with them, they denounce as a Nazi or operating concentration camps at the border, all this inflammatory rhetoric. And then they look at a state such as Israel, a country such as Israel, where many Holocaust survivors and the descendants of Holocaust victims, many of them still live in Israel, and yet they're acting like they're the problem.
Well, I think this is also a part of the broader narrative, which is to paint Israel as springing into existence after the Holocaust, as if it was some kind of, I guess, gift for the Jews to try and apologize for the horrors of the Holocaust, when Jews have had a non-stop place in Israel for thousands of years. Israel didn't just spring into existence because Western powers made it so. This is also something that characters like Rashida Tlaib push, which is, again, to delegitimize the historical roots that Judaism has in Israel, is to make it just a very sort of last minute, the last couple of decades, the Jews took over Israel before it was the Palestinians. A lot of it is just ahistorical nonsense that's being pushed by groups like Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, you're exactly right. For example, in the Middle East, in that area specifically, Jews have been living there for many millennia, for many, many thousands and thousands of years. Long before Islam, for example, came along. Islam is a quite younger religion when it comes to the three Abrahamic religions. But here, of course, we were talking earlier how the left consistently, everyone's a Nazi, everyone's a white supremacist, everyone's running concentration camps here in America. It's the Holocaust all over again. But we're also starting to see some people on the right as well using that term as well to describe describe what we're seeing right now with the silencing of free speech. How can we draw parallels to the past without also belittling, I guess you could say, what actually happened during the Holocaust and the horrific human suffering that actually did happen to millions of people?
Well, I think we need to do two things. I think first we need to be very careful with our language and try and avoid the standard political hyperbole we see where the Holocaust is like every bad thing we witness. But I also think we need to be a little bit more careful and direct when we're understanding what argument we're putting forward. A lot of people like to use the Holocaust because people understand that the Nazis are the bad guys in the story, and therefore anything you can do to stop them is worthwhile. So if you can paint Donald Trump as the latest version of Hitler, then anything you can do to stop Hitler is justified. So I think we need to understand the context people use this comparison in. I think there are some people who use it in sort of good faith. So, for example, Gina Carano, who excitedly has signed to make a film with the Daily Wire, which is really great. Her comparison that the left were just pulling their hair out over was far more apt than the comparison they've made for 4 years, which is comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, comparing immigration officers to concentration camp guards. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez famously made an Instagram video where she compared migrant housing and where people were being detained for crossing the border illegally to concentration camps. I think unless people are directly seeking a genocide, you can't really make that comparison with the Holocaust. And a piece I wrote for the Daily Wire recently was trying to define what I call the Holocaust law, which makes this exact statement, where unless, for example, in China with the Uyghur Muslims, where people are actively persecuting someone based on a characteristic like race or religion, you can't make that comparison. And as you say, it dismisses the unthinkable weight of that moment in history.
You're exactly right, Ian. Always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.